The night was quiet on the research vessel horizon. The ship drifted slowly through the darkness beyond Neptune, its sensors reaching out into the empty void. Most of the crew slept while a skeleton team kept watch over the ship's systems. Alan, Gardner, sat alone in the communications room. He rubbed his tired eyes as he monitored the incoming signals. After 3 years in deep space, the daily routine had become almost boring. He reached for his coffee cup and took a sip of the cold liquid. Then he noticed something on his screen. "That's odd," he said to himself. The pattern repeated over and over, not random static but a deliberate sequence. Alan sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. He checked the system for errors, but everything worked perfectly. This was a real signal, coming from somewhere beyond the edge of the solar system. He pressed the intercom button. "Dr. Nelson, please come to communications. I've found something you need to see." Catherine Nelson arrived 5 minutes later, her hair still messy from sleep. She had been the ship's xenolinguistics expert for 8 years, but most of her work involved studying old radio waves and theoretical signal patterns. Nothing real had ever appeared on their sensors. "Show me," she said, sliding into the chair next to Alan. He pointed to the screen. "It's been repeating for the last 20 minutes. Same pattern, same strength." Catherine stared at the display. Her hands moved quickly over the keyboard as she isolated the signal and ran it through various filters. "This isn't natural," she said after several minutes. "And it's definitely not one of ours." For the next 3 days, Catherine barely left the communications room. She worked tirelessly, breaking down the signal into its basic parts and feeding it through the ship's advanced translation algorithms. By the 3rd day, she knew enough to call for an emergency meeting with Captain Peter Franklin. The captain's office was small but neat. Model ships lined the shelves, and a single photo of his family sat on the desk. He listened without interrupting, as Catherine explained what she had found. "It's a distress call," she said, placing a datapad in front of him. "And it's not human." Captain Franklin stared at the pad. "You're certain?" "Completely. The mathematics are universal. The signal contains basic count sequences that couldn't happen randomly, followed by more complex data. We've translated about 60% of it so far." "And what does it say?" the captain asked. Catherine took a deep breath. "There's a fleet of ships, generation ships carrying the survivors of some kind of planetary disaster. Their engines have failed, and they're trapped in a decaying orbit around an unstable star. Based on the orbital calculations they included, they have less than 6 months before they'll be too close to the star to survive." "How far away are they?" "About 4 light years from our current position. The signal is old. They've been broadcasting it for over 20 years, hoping someone would hear them." Captain Franklin stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into space. "We need to send this to Earth immediately." Within hours, the data was transmitted back to Earth, where it landed on the desk of Navy Admiral John Bell. He was a tall man with gray hair and a face marked by years of difficult decisions. As he reviewed the information from the horizon, he knew this would be the most important situation of his career. "Get me the president," he said to his aide. The news spread quickly through the highest levels of government. An emergency meeting was called in Washington, D.C., bringing together military leaders, scientists, and government officials. They gathered in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon. Admiral Bell stood at the front of the room, his face serious as he explained the situation. The alien fleet consists of approximately 12 large vessels plus one significantly larger central ship. They appear to be the last survivors of their civilization. Their homeworld was destroyed or became uninhabitable. We're still working on those details. Secretary of Defense Martin Lewis spoke first. "What kind of weapons do these ships have?" "Unknown," Bell replied. "But the nature of their message suggests they're refugees, not invaders." "Or that's what they want us to think," countered General Harper. "This could be a trap to reveal our location and technology." The debate continued for hours. Some argued that humanity should respond, that it was their moral duty to help. Others worried about the risks of first contact, especially with a desperate and potentially dangerous alien species. "We don't even know if we can help them," said Dr. Helen Ward, the government's top physicist. "The technology required to reach them in time would be beyond anything we've ever built." "Then we build it," said NASA Director Sam Wilson. "We've had the theories for faster propulsion systems for years. We just haven't had the funding or the urgency to develop them." President Laura Gibson had listened quietly throughout the meeting. Now she spoke. What would it take? Director Wilson outlined the requirements: 3 ships equipped with experimental drive systems, crews willing to risk their lives on untested technology, and a unified global effort, unlike anything seen since the International Space Station. The odds of success are low, he admitted, but it's not impossible. The room fell silent. The cost would be enormous, both in resources and potentially in human lives, and the benefits were uncertain at best. From the corner of the room, a voice spoke up. Linda Martinez was a junior analyst who had been invited to take notes. She wasn't supposed to speak, but something compelled her to stand up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'd like to say something." The president nodded for her to continue. 20 years ago, these beings sent out a call for help, not knowing if anyone would hear them or respond. They put their hope in the idea that somewhere, someone would care enough to save them. Linda looked around the room. "If we were lost and dying among the stars, we'd hope someone would answer our call. That's what makes us human." Her simple words cut through the complex arguments. The room was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez," the president said softly. Then she turned to the others. "We will answer their call. Not because it's easy or safe or politically advantageous, but because it's right. Because it's who we are, or at least who we strive to be." The decision made, events moved quickly. NASA and other space agencies around the world began working on what the media called the response. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock to develop the technology needed for the rescue mission. In homes across the planet, people watched the news with a mixture of fear and hope. For the first time in human history, they were united by something bigger than national interests or global problems. They were united by the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, and that somewhere out there, an entire civilization was depending on them. At Mission Control in Houston, Alan Gardner and Catherine Nelson had been brought back to Earth to help coordinate the communication efforts. They stood side by side watching as the world mobilized for the greatest rescue mission in history. "Do you think we can do it?" Alan asked quietly. Catherine looked at the star map showing the position of the alien fleet, then at the hundreds of people working tirelessly around them. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we have to try." Outside the building, protesters held signs questioning the mission. Some feared the aliens, others argued that the resources should be used to solve Earth's problems instead, but they were outnumbered by supporters. Ordinary people who brought food to the NASA workers, children who drew pictures of humans and aliens holding hands, and volunteers who offered their services in any way that might help. In a small apartment in Chicago, Linda Martinez watched the preparations on television. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the news of her speech leaked to the press. She had been offered book deals, interview requests, and even movie rights. She turned them all down. She hadn't spoken up for fame or recognition. She had spoken up because it was the right thing to do. As night fell across the earth, billions of people looked up at the stars with new eyes, wondering about the beings who had sent out a desperate call into the darkness, and about what would happen next. News of the alien distress call spread across Earth like wildfire. In homes, schools, and workplaces, people talked about nothing else. For the first time in history, humanity knew for certain they were not alone in the universe. William Hayes sat in his small office at NASA headquarters, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. As the newly appointed project director for the rescue mission, he hadn't slept properly in days. His phone rang constantly. Scientists and engineers from around the world sent him ideas and designs. Everyone wanted to help. "Sir, the team from Japan is on line 3, his assistant called from the doorway. William nodded tiredly. "Tell them I'll call back in 10 minutes. I need to finish these calculations first. The mission faced an impossible challenge. They needed to reach the alien fleet faster than any human ship had ever traveled. The aliens were trapped in orbit around a volatile star system 4 light-years away. At normal speeds, it would take decades to reach them. They had 6 months. In a large workshop at the Johnson Space Center, engineers worked day and night to retrofit 3 vessels with experimental drive systems. The ships had been under construction for Mars missions, but now they served a far more important purpose. The largest ship, renamed the Salvation, would be the primary rescue vessel. It contained living quarters, meeting rooms for first contact, and advanced communication systems. The second ship, the Guardian, would provide security and technological support. The smallest ship, the Dauntless, was converted into a medical vessel. Olivia Chen, a flight engineer with 15 years of experience, studied the new engine designs with worried eyes. The experimental drives were based on theories that had never been fully tested. She made careful adjustments to the blueprints, pushing the systems beyond their designed limits. "This is dangerous," she told William during their daily meeting. "We'll be flying ships that are basically experimental prototypes. If the drives fail mid-journey, we won't be coming home." William looked at her steadily. "Do we have a choice?" "No," she admitted. "But the crews need to understand the risks." "They do," William assured her, "and they're still lining up to volunteer." NASA had expected to struggle finding crews willing to undertake such a dangerous mission. Instead, they received applications from nearly every qualified pilot, engineer, doctor, and scientist on Earth. The selection committee worked overtime to review thousands of files. Captain Susan Cooper was chosen to command the Salvation. At 42, she had more spaceflight experience than any other active astronaut. Her calm leadership style and quick thinking made her the perfect choice for such an uncertain mission. "Why did you volunteer?" a reporter asked her during the pre-mission press conference. Susan smiled slightly. "Because if we don't go, an entire civilization dies. How could I live with myself if I didn't try to help?" Captain Gregory Evans would lead the Guardian. A former military pilot with a serious face but kind eyes, he had a reputation for keeping his crew safe in dangerous situations. The Dauntless would be commanded by Captain Daniel Wright, a veteran of 3 space station missions who had also worked as a paramedic before joining NASA. Dr. Richard Moore was selected as chief medical officer for the mission. He had spent his career studying theoretical xenobiology, the possible biology of alien life forms. What had once seemed like an academic exercise was now critically important. "We have no idea what these beings will be like," he explained to his medical team. "Different atmospheres, different biology, possibly different chemistry altogether. We need to be ready for anything." The final crew member selected for the Salvation was communications specialist Henry Mitchell. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife to cancer. Since then, he had thrown himself into his work, becoming an expert in communication systems and theoretical alien languages. On the night before he left for final training, Henry sat with his daughter Sarah in their backyard. They looked up at the stars together. "Are you scared, Dad?" Sarah asked quietly. Henry thought for a moment. "Yes," he said honestly. "But sometimes the things that scare us are the most important things we'll ever do. What if the aliens are dangerous?" "They might be different from us in many ways," Henry said, "but they care for their children just like we do. They're trying to survive just like anyone would. We're not just saving them. We're showing them who we are." Sarah hugged him tightly. "Come back, okay?" "I'll do my best," he promised. Around the world, similar scenes played out as crew members said goodbye to their families. Some would be gone for years. Others knew they might never return. Meanwhile, scientists and linguists worked to decode more of the alien message. Each day brought new insights into the beings they were trying to save. "They call themselves the Valerians," Dr. Catherine Nelson explained during a briefing. "Their planet suffered a series of natural disasters that made it uninhabitable. These ships carry all that remains of their civilization, their people, their knowledge, their history." "How many?" asked William. Based on the data, approximately 1.7 million individuals, Catherine said. They've been traveling for over 70 years, looking for a new home. The enormity of the responsibility settled over the room. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was an attempt to save an entire civilization from extinction. As launch day approached, technical teams worked frantically to finish the ships. The experimental drive systems were installed and tested as thoroughly as possible, given the time constraints. Supply pods were loaded with food, medicine, spare parts, and gifts for the aliens, examples of human art, music, and literature. We want their first impression of humanity to be a good one, President Gibson told the crews during her visit to the launch facility. The night before launch, billions of people around the world turned on their televisions or opened their devices to watch what would later be called the Unity broadcast. For 24 hours, people from every nation on Earth sent messages of hope and encouragement, both to the human crews and to the unknown aliens they were racing to save. Children drew pictures. Musicians played songs. Religious leaders offered prayers. Scientists explained the importance of the mission. Ordinary people shared their thoughts and feelings. "We are reaching out across the stars," said an elderly woman from Kenya. "We are saying you are not alone. We hear you. We are coming." Henry watched the broadcast from his quarters, moved by the outpouring of support and hope. Perhaps humanity was better than its troubled history suggested. Perhaps this mission represented the best of what people could be. On launch morning, the crews woke before dawn. They ate a simple breakfast together, mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then they suited up and made their way to the ships that would carry them across the stars. Captain Susan Cooper was the last to board the Salvation. She paused at the entrance and looked back at Earth, brilliant and blue against the blackness of space. Then she took a deep breath and stepped inside. "All stations report," she said, as she settled into the command chair. One by one, the crew members confirmed they were ready. In mission control, William Hayes and his team monitored the countdown. "T-minus 10 seconds, said the launch controller. 9, 8, 7. Around the world, people held their breath. 6, 5, 4. In her apartment in Chicago, Linda Martinez watched the launch on television, her hand pressed against the screen. 3, 2, 1. The engines ignited with blinding light. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed, the three ships rose from Earth. They climbed higher and higher until they were just bright dots in the sky, and then they were gone, carrying with them the hopes of two civilizations. The response had begun. The darkness of space surrounded the three ships as they traveled farther from Earth than any human had ever gone. Inside the Salvation, Captain Susan Cooper made her daily rounds, checking on each section of the ship and speaking with her crew. They had been traveling for 3 weeks, and so far the experimental drive systems were working better than expected. "How are you holding up?" she asked, stopping by the communications center where Henry Mitchell was working. Henry looked up from his console with tired eyes. "I'm okay, Captain. Just trying to make sense of some new transmissions we picked up from the Valerian fleet." The screens in front of him showed strange symbols and patterns. Since leaving Earth, they had received more signals from the aliens. Each new message helped them understand more about the beings they were racing to save. "Any progress?" Susan asked. Henry nodded. "Their language is complex, but we're starting to understand the basic structure. They communicate with both sounds and colors. They're sending us information about their ships, their people, their needs. Good work. Get some rest soon," Susan said, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder before continuing her rounds. In the medical bay of the Dauntless, Dr. Richard Moore and his team prepared for their eventual meeting with the Valerians. Based on the information they had decoded so far, the aliens breathed a similar atmosphere to humans but required slightly more oxygen. Their biology was different in many ways, but there were surprising similarities too. "They have families," Richard told Captain Daniel Wright as they reviewed the data. "Parents care for their young, they feel pain, they experience emotions. Despite evolving on a different world, we share some basic traits." On the bridge of the Guardian, Captain Gregory Evans studied the star charts showing their path to the Valyrian fleet. The journey would take 5 months at their current speed, just barely enough time to reach the aliens before their orbit brought them too close to the unstable star. "We need to go faster," he murmured to himself. As if in answer to his thoughts, a sudden alarm blared through all 3 ships. The experimental drives were showing unusual energy patterns. The ships slowed automatically as safety systems engaged The Salvation, Chief Engineer Frank Wilson rushed to the engine room. He found Olivia Chen already there, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "What happened?" he asked, joining her. "Power fluctuation in the main drive," she replied without looking up. "The system is overheating. We need to shut it down and let it cool." Frank's face showed his concern. "How long?" "At least 12 hours, Olivia said. "Maybe more." The news quickly reached Captain Cooper. She called an emergency meeting with the other ship captains over the communication system. "We can't afford to lose that much time," Captain Evans said. "The Valyrians have less than 5 months now." "I might have a solution," Olivia said quietly. "But it's risky." All eyes turned to her. "The drives are running at 80% capacity. If we push them to 100%, we could make up the lost time and more." "You said that might be dangerous," Susan reminded her. Olivia nodded. "The systems weren't designed to run at full capacity for extended periods. We could burn them out completely. If that happened so far from Earth." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what it meant. They would be stranded in deep space with no way home. After a long discussion, the decision was made. They would take the risk. The drives would be repaired, then pushed to their limits. 2 days later, the ships resumed their journey at higher speed than before. For a while, everything seemed to be working perfectly. They were on track to reach the Valyrians with time to spare. But after 6 weeks of travel at maximum speed, disaster struck. The Dauntless was in the middle of a routine system check when a power surge ripped through the ship. Alarms screamed as emergency lights flashed on. In the engine room, a small explosion threw crew members to the floor. "Drive failure!" shouted the engineer over the communication system. "Complete drive failure." Captain Wright fought to keep his ship stable as systems failed around him. The Salvation and Guardian slowed to help, but it quickly became clear that the Dauntless could not be repaired fully. The experimental drive had burned out beyond repair. "We can't maintain the speed necessary to reach the aliens in time, Captain," Wright said during the emergency meeting. "But we can still serve a purpose." His plan was simple but required great sacrifice. The Dauntless would transfer its critical medical equipment and key personnel to the other ships. Then it would stay behind to serve as a communication relay between the other ships and Earth, which was now too far away for direct contact. "My crew and I volunteer to remain," Wright said firmly. "The mission is more important than any of us." With heavy hearts, the 3 crews worked together to transfer people and supplies. When it was done, the Salvation and Guardian continued their journey while the Dauntless remained behind, a lonely outpost in the emptiness of space. As the months passed, life aboard the remaining ships fell into a routine. The crew of the Salvation worked in shifts, maintaining the ship, studying the alien signals, and preparing for first contact. In their free time, they exercised in the small gym, watched old movies, or wrote messages to families they might never see again. Julia Sanders, the first officer of the Salvation, led a team dedicated to learning everything they could about the Valyrians. They worked day and night to decode more of the alien transmissions. "They've been traveling for over 70 years, Julia explained during a briefing. "They left their homeworld after a series of natural disasters made it uninhabitable. These ships carry approximately 1.7 million survivors. They're the last of their kind." She displayed images they had constructed based on the alien data. The Valyrians appeared to be tall, slender beings with 4 arms and large eyes. Their skin had a bluish tint and seemed partially transparent. "They evolved on a world with much less sunlight than Earth," Julia continued. "Their eyes are adapted to see in dim light. Their skin can absorb energy directly from their environment. They're beautiful in their own way." The crew studied the Valyrian culture too. They learned that the aliens valued art and music. They had complex family structures. They mourned their dead with elaborate ceremonies. They recorded their history through what seemed to be a combination of written language and visual patterns. "They're not so different from us," Julia observed as she studied their cultural database. "They value art, they care for their young, they mourn their dead." 4 months into the mission, both remaining ships lost contact with the Dauntless as they passed beyond the range of its communication system. They were truly alone now, racing toward a civilization that had no idea help was coming. As they entered the star system where the Valerian fleet was trapped, Captain Cooper ordered a full scan of the area. The results were sobering. The system contained a highly unstable star that was showing signs of increased activity. If the Valerians continued on their current path, they would be exposed to deadly radiation levels within weeks. "We got here, just in time," she said quietly. The next day, the human ships detected debris floating in space, the scattered remains of smaller vessels. Captain Evans ordered a brief stop to investigate. "These might be ships that tried to flee the Valerian homeworld but failed," he said. "There might be important information here." A small team in protective suits ventured out to examine the wreckage. Among the debris, they found data crystals containing scientific knowledge and cultural records that the Valerians had tried to preserve. Back on the Salvation, Engineer Paul Wilson made an important discovery as he studied the information they had about the alien ships. Their main propulsion systems were damaged by radiation from an unexpected solar flare, he explained to Captain Cooper. "The problem isn't with their technology, it's with the materials they used. They lack certain metallurgical techniques that we developed on Earth." It was a sobering thought, that for all their advancement, the aliens might be saved by something as simple as human metallurgy. Finally, after nearly 5 months of travel, the human ships approached the Valerian fleet. Through the viewports, the crews could see the massive generation ships, 12 enormous vessels arranged in a defensive formation around a central ship, nearly twice the size of the others. "Look at what they built," whispered Medical Officer Nancy Garcia as she stood beside Captain Cooper on the bridge. "They refused to let their species die without a fight." The Salvation transmitted first contact protocols as they approached. Mathematical sequences followed by simple images designed to communicate peaceful intentions. After several tense hours, they received a response. A simple video transmission showing hundreds of Valerians gathered in what appeared to be a central chamber, their 4-limbed forms pressing close to screens showing the approaching human ships. They were watching, they were hoping, and they finally knew they weren't alone anymore. The first face-to-face meeting between humans and Valerians took place in a specially prepared chamber aboard the Salvation. Captain Susan Cooper led a small team that included Henry Mitchell, Dr. Richard Moore, and Julia Sanders. They stood, nervously, as the airlock cycled open. 3 Valerians entered the room. They were tall and slender, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Their large eyes blinked slowly as they looked at the humans. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then one of the Valerians stepped forward. It wore an elaborate harness decorated with shimmering symbols. Using a translation device developed from their communications, it spoke. "I am Ellery, leader of the combined fleet. We thank you for coming to our aid." Susan stepped forward as well. "I am Captain Susan Cooper of the Earth vessel Salvation. We received your distress call and came to help." Ellery's skin changed color, slightly, shifting to a deeper blue. "You traveled across the void between stars to save those you have never met. We did not know such kindness existed among other beings." The meeting lasted several hours as both sides shared information about their species and their situation. The Valerians explained how their homeworld had suffered a series of environmental disasters that made it uninhabitable. They had built their fleet of ships to carry the survivors to a new home, but after 70 years of travel, their main engines had failed after damage from a solar flare. "We were trapped in a decaying orbit," Ellery said. "In less than 3 of your Earth months, our path would bring us too close to the star. We would all perish." "We're here to make sure that doesn't happen," Susan assured them. The next day, engineering teams from both ships began working together. Chief Engineer Frank Wilson and Engineer Paul Wilson from the Salvation met with the Valyrian engineers in the massive engine room of their central ship. Despite their different biologies and languages, the universal principles of physics and engineering help them understand each other. Their technology is actually more advanced than ours in many ways, Frank explained to Captain Cooper after the first day of work. But they developed along a different path. They never discovered certain alloys and materials that we use commonly on Earth. Can we help them? Susan asked. Paul nodded excitedly. We brought samples of everything we might need. We can set up a manufacturing facility aboard the Guardian to produce the components they need. Their engines aren't actually broken beyond repair. They just need materials that can withstand the radiation from the star. Work began immediately. Human and Valyrian engineers labored side by side, learning from each other as they repaired the alien engines. The process was not without challenges. The different working styles and communication barriers sometimes led to misunderstandings and frustrations. Amanda Taylor, a young engineer from the Guardian, made a breakthrough when she discovered a way to interface human and Valyrian technologies. She worked for 36 hours straight, refusing to rest until she had solved the problem. When she finally succeeded, both human and alien engineers celebrated together. Meanwhile, Dr. Moore and his medical team made an equally important discovery. Many of the younger Valyrians were suffering from a mysterious illness that their doctors had been unable to cure. It's not a disease, Dr. Moore explained as he studied the data. It's a nutritional deficiency. Their hydroponic systems have developed a flaw over generations of use. A specific mineral is no longer being absorbed properly by their food plants. The solution was a simple compound that Earth farmers used regularly to enrich soil. When the Valyrian children began receiving treatments, they improved rapidly. Their skin brightened and they regained their energy. You have saved our future, Ellery told Dr. Moore, placing a four-fingered hand gently on his shoulder. Without our children, there would be no point in saving our ships. As the weeks passed, the cultural exchange deepened. Humans learned about Valyrian art, music, and philosophy. The aliens shared their advanced knowledge of stellar mechanics and biological engineering. In return, humans offered solutions to problems that had plagued the alien fleet for generations. Samuel Grant, the chief engineer from the Guardian, led the final phase of the repair work. The new components were installed in each of the 12 ships in the Valyrian fleet, plus the larger central vessel. Testing began carefully, with each system checked and rechecked before moving to the next. We can't afford any mistakes, Samuel reminded his team. The lives of 1.7 million beings depend on us getting this right. On the day the repaired engines were scheduled for their first full test, everyone held their breath. Human crews watched from their ships while Valyrians gathered in observation rooms throughout their fleet. Captain Cooper stood on the bridge of the Salvation beside Ellery. The Valyrian leader's skin had taken on a pale, almost white color that humans had learned indicated anxiety. All ships report ready, Julia announced from her station. Susan looked at Ellery, who gave the Valyrian equivalent of a nod. Initiate engine start sequence, Susan ordered. For a tense minute, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly, lights began to appear along the hulls of the Valyrian ships. A low hum vibrated through space, felt rather than heard by both species. Power levels at 20% and stable, reported Frank from engineering. 30%. 40%? The numbers continued to climb steadily. When they reached 80%, Ellery's skin bloomed into a vibrant purple, the Valyrian expression of joy. The engines were working perfectly. Set course for safe orbit, Susan ordered. The massive engines pushed the Valyrian fleet into a new trajectory, away from the dangerous pull of the unstable star. Cheers erupted from both human and alien crews. In that moment, the differences between their species seemed to fade away. They were just people who had worked together to achieve something remarkable. That evening, a celebration was held in the great hall of the central Valyrian ship. Humans and Valyrians shared food and drinks specially prepared to be safe for both species. Musicians from both crews played together, creating a strange but beautiful harmony. In a gesture that would later become historic, Ellery invited Captain Cooper to stand beside her as she addressed her people. Today we learned an important truth, Ellery said. her words translated through the communication systems. That compassion can bridge the void between worlds. The rescue mission transformed into a cultural exchange. For 6 weeks, the ships traveled together as the Valerians adjusted their course toward a star system they had identified as potentially habitable. The humans helped them set up improved hydroponic systems, more efficient recycling processes, and better medical facilities. In return, the Valerians shared their advanced knowledge. They taught the humans about faster ways to travel through space, more efficient energy systems, and new medical techniques. It was a fair exchange that benefited both species. As the time approached for the human ships to begin their long journey home, the Valerians presented them with a gift, a navigational database containing detailed information about hundreds of habitable worlds they had charted during their long journey. "We have been wanderers too long," Ellery told Captain Cooper during the farewell ceremony. "Perhaps together we can both find homes among the stars." A small Valerian vessel, carrying diplomats and scientists, would accompany the human ships back to Earth, the first official delegation to make contact with the rest of humanity. The journey would be long, but neither species would travel alone. What no one from either fleet knew was that they were being watched. From a nearly invisible ship hiding at the edge of the star system, representatives of the Galactic Council observed the proceedings with great interest. Humanity had been under observation for centuries, considered too volatile and dangerous for contact with the wider galactic community. But this unexpected act of selfless courage caused the Council to reconsider. The senior observer made a note. In the official record, "Species shows remarkable capacity for altruism beyond tribal boundaries. Recommendation: advance timetable for official contact." As the Salvation and Guardian departed, with the Valerian diplomatic vessel beside them, Captain Cooper stood at the viewport watching the alien fleet grow smaller in the distance. They were safe now, on their way to a new home. "We answered the call," she wrote in her final mission log. "Not because we had to, but because we couldn't imagine doing otherwise. And in saving them, we discovered the best of ourselves." Years later, historians would point to the Valerian rescue as the moment humanity truly became a spacefaring civilization, not because of the technology they developed, but because they had proven themselves worthy of the stars.